For most of a century, four badges told you who ruled the road: Volkswagen, Toyota, BMW, Mercedes-Benz. Empires built on pistons and prestige, on a century of knowing exactly how a car should be built and who was allowed to build it. Somewhere in the last 5 years, without a single headline that fully captured it, that certainty quietly broke. Here are 3 things that shouldn't be possible. A company almost nobody outside China had heard of a decade ago now builds and sells more fully electric cars in a single year than Tesla, the company that invented the modern EV market. That same company owns the raw materials, the batteries, the chips, the factories, and now the ships that carry its cars across oceans, nearly every link in a chain that usually takes a century and a dozen partners to assemble. And the government that allowed this to happen didn't do it by accident. It planned it decades in advance as part of something far larger than automobiles. This is the story of BYD. But if you think this is a story about cars, you've already missed the point. This is a story about how a nation quietly rewired an entire industry to serve a purpose far beyond the showroom floor. Start with the collapse nobody wanted to admit was happening. In showrooms from Berlin to Bangkok, the brands that assumed permanent dominance began losing ground they never expected to lose. Thailand, a market so thoroughly controlled by Japanese manufacturers that people called it the Detroit of Asia, their combined share fell from over 90% to around 76% in barely 2 years. In Brazil, Ford didn't just lose market share, it closed an entire factory in 2021 and walked away from the country's second largest economy altogether. In Europe, in May of 2025, a Chinese car maker outsold Tesla in monthly EV registrations for the first time ever by a margin of 66 cars. Small number, enormous symbol. None of these companies collapsed because they made worse cars in the way people usually mean it. They collapsed because they were still playing a game from the 20th century, while someone else had quietly started playing a different one entirely. That someone was building electric cars before most of the world had decided electric cars were worth building. And to understand why, you have to stop thinking about cars for a moment and start thinking about something much smaller: a battery. Go back to 1995. 29-year-old chemist named Wang Chuanfu, orphaned as a teenager, raised by an older brother and sister in one of China's poorest provinces, borrowed 250,000 yuan from his cousin and opened a rechargeable battery workshop on the outskirts of Shenzhen. 20 employees, a rented building, no pedigree, no state backing, nothing but an observation. Japanese manufacturers were abandoning an older battery technology to chase something more advanced, and in that gap, there was an opening. Wang's team did something unglamorous but decisive. They took apart Sony and Sanyo batteries, studied them piece by piece, and rebuilt the manufacturing process around cheap, abundant labor instead of the expensive automated lines the Japanese relied on. It wasn't elegant, it was relentless. Within a few years, his company was making batteries for Motorola and Nokia, and had quietly become one of the largest battery manufacturers on Earth, a fact almost nobody outside the electronics industry noticed at the time. Then, in 2003, Wang did something that looked to nearly everyone watching like a mistake. He bought a failing state-owned car company most people had never heard of. Batterymen don't build cars. Everyone told him so. Build cars anyway. But that wasn't the real breakthrough. The real breakthrough was the reason he did it. Wang had already worked out something the rest of the auto industry wouldn't accept for another 15 years. The internal combustion engine was a 100-year head start that Chinese manufacturers could never close. Germany, Japan, and America had decades of engine expertise locked behind patents, precision tooling, and institutional knowledge no amount of money could buy quickly. But an electric car isn't built around an engine, it's built around a battery. And Wang already controlled the one input that mattered most to the car of the future, at a moment when almost no established automaker considered batteries their business at all. They bought them from suppliers, the way you'd buy tires or glass. Wang made his own. This is the part competitors underestimated, and it's worth sitting with because it's the hinge the entire story turns on. While Detroit, Wolfsburg, and Tokyo were racing to perfect the last generation of technology, a battery company in Shenzhen had quietly positioned itself to skip the race altogether. Wang called electric vehicles a stepping stone, not a product,
a shortcut around 100 years of competition China could never have won on the old terms. For a while, it looked like a bet that might not pay off. Between 2017 and 2019, Chinese subsidies for electric vehicles were sharply cut, and BYD's profits collapsed for 3 straight years, bottoming out at a fraction of what the company had earned before. Wang called it the company's darkest moment, a period where the only goal, in his own words, was survival. Most companies in that position cut research spending. BYD poured over 8 billion yuan into it anyway. That decision produced the second masterstroke in 2020, the blade battery. At the exact moment much of the battery industry was abandoning lithium iron phosphate chemistry as old-fashioned and lower energy, BYD doubled down on it, betting that safety, cost, and manufacturability would matter more than a marginal edge in range. Videos began circulating of the blade battery being pierced with a steel nail on camera and simply not catching fire, while comparable batteries beside it burst instantly into flame. It became one of the most watched pieces of industrial marketing in EV history, without BYD ever calling it marketing at all. But the batteries were never the whole plan. They were the first domino. Here is where the strategy stops looking like one masterstroke and starts looking like a system, revealed one piece at a time, the way a chess player only shows you the trap after you've already stepped into it. The next piece was vertical integration, taken to a degree almost no automaker on Earth had attempted. BYD didn't just make its own batteries. Through a web of subsidiaries called FinDreams, it began making its own semiconductors, its own electric motors, its own molds, its own vision systems, even components it then sold to rival automakers, turning competitors into customers. Most car makers assemble a vehicle from parts made by dozens of outside suppliers, each one adding cost, delay, and dependency. BYD, increasingly, simply didn't need them. That decision paid off in a moment nobody could have scripted. In 2021, a global semiconductor shortage brought the much of the world's auto industry to a standstill. Factories idled, waiting lists stretched past a year because chips that cost a few dollars each weren't available at any price. BYD, which made many of its own chips in-house, barely flinched. The rest of the industry learned the hard way what it means to not control your own supply chain. BYD had already learned it on purpose years earlier. Then came the piece almost nobody in the West wanted to say out loud: government support. Since 2009, Beijing had treated new energy vehicles as a strategic pillar of national industrial policy, not a niche green initiative, offering subsidies, tax breaks, cheap land, and preferential financing to companies willing to build the industry China wanted to own. BYD was one of the biggest beneficiaries. European regulators later concluded, after a formal investigation, that this state support gave Chinese manufacturers an unfair cost advantage and imposed extra tariffs as a result, 17% on BYD specifically, on top of the European Union's standard 10%. It's a genuinely contested question how much of BYD's edge comes from smart engineering and how much from the state's thumb on the scale. The honest answer, almost certainly, is both, and untangling the two may be the whole point.
Because manufacturing efficiency stacked on top of all of it. BYD's Chinese factories can move from a rendered design to a finished vehicle in a fraction of the time Western automakers typically need, getting new models into showrooms at a pace competitors have openly struggled to match. The company doesn't sell one electric car and call it a lineup. It sells dozens, from a compact hatchback priced under $15,000 to million-yuan supercars under its Yangwang brand. A strategy less like a single product than an invasion on every price point simultaneously, so that no competitor, however they position themselves, is ever safe. Notice, too, that the strategy never stopped at affordable. That's the misconception most casual observers still carry, the assumption that a company built on cheap batteries must be chasing the bottom of the market forever. In reality, BYD spun up separate brands aimed at entirely different psychological territory. Denza, built with Mercedes-Benz technical input, courts buyers who want European badge prestige. Hengqianbao chases the rugged off-road buyer. Yangwang, the most audacious of the three, builds million-yuan electric supercars and armored SUVs that can, genuinely, float across a river. It's the same underlying playbook the smartphone industry perfected a decade earlier. Control the core technology once, then wrap it in as many price points and identities as the market can absorb, so that no competitor, cheap or premium, ever gets to stand somewhere BYD hasn't already arrived first. And then
then, in the last 2 years, came a piece almost nobody outside the shipping industry noticed at all. BYD started building its own fleet of car-carrying ships. It sounds like a footnote? It isn't. As BYD's exports surged and global freight rates for chartering car carriers spiked toward $150,000 a day, the company committed roughly $700 million to building its own roll-on, roll-off vessels, ships where cars simply drive on and drive off, rather than being craned into containers. The largest of them, the BYD Shenzhen, can carry over 9,000 vehicles at once and is, at the time of its launch, the biggest car-carrying ship ever built. By the time the fleet is complete, BYD estimates it will cut per-vehicle shipping costs by up to 40% and save well over $1 billion a year. Control not just over what it builds, but over how it reaches the world, immune to the freight markets that squeeze everyone else. Batteries, chips, motors, factories, now ships. At every single stage where a normal company would depend on someone else and be vulnerable to that dependency, BYD had spent 2 decades quietly building its own version instead, which is when you have to zoom all the way out, because none of this was really BYD's idea alone. China imports the overwhelming majority of the oil that powers its economy, strategic vulnerability that has worried Beijing for decades, a dependence on tankers passing through waters it doesn't control, refined by companies it doesn't own, priced in a currency it doesn't print. Electric vehicles quietly solve that problem. A car that runs on a battery runs on electricity generated largely inside China's own borders. From coal, hydro, solar, and nuclear plants, China controls completely. Swap the fleet and you swap a vulnerability for a strength. But the deeper strength isn't the batteries themselves, it's what goes into them. China refines roughly 60 to 90% of the world's lithium, well over 90% of its graphite, and around 90% of the rare earth magnets used in electric motors and modern electronics. On the specific cathode chemistry the blade battery relies on, Chinese firms control something close to a monopoly. This dominance wasn't found in the ground. China isn't even the world's largest holder of these raw deposits. It was built over 30 years through refining capacity and processing expertise that took decades to construct, and no rival economy has managed to replicate at scale. In the autumn of 2025, Beijing tightened export controls on precisely these materials in the middle of a trade standoff with Washington. A reminder that this wasn't only an industrial advantage, it was leverage, and leverage can be used. Oil built the 20th century's balance of power. Whoever controlled the tankers and the fields held the leverage. Lithium and rare earths are quietly becoming the same kind of asset for the century now underway, except this time, the country holding most of the leverage isn't an oil kingdom, it's the one building the cars too, which brings the story to its consequences, playing out in real time on every continent. In Europe, tariffs slowed BYD without stopping it, so BYD simply built around them, opening factories in Hungary and Turkey, with more sites reportedly under consideration, so that cars sold in Europe would be built in Europe, tariff or no tariff. In the United States, the response was blunter. A tariff so large, 100% quadrupled from its previous level, that it functions less like a trade measure and more like a wall. BYD, for now, essentially doesn't sell passenger cars in America at all. In Latin America, the company took over the very factory Ford abandoned in Brazil, an image almost too on the nose to be real. The assembly line of a departed American giant restarted under a Chinese flag, building the cars that are now the best-selling new energy vehicles in the country. In Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, across Africa, the pattern repeats. Local manufacturing, local pricing, local partnerships, each one built to make tariffs and trade barriers largely irrelevant. Legacy automakers are left with an uncomfortable choice, and neither option feels like winning. Match the price, and margins that took a century to build start to disappear. Retreat to the premium end of the market, and you cede the mass market, the actual future of global vehicle ownership, to somebody else entirely. Some are trying a third path, rewriting the rules of the relationship itself. Manufacturers experimenting with agency sales models are attempting to cut costly dealer networks out of the pricing equation altogether, hoping thinner overhead can claw back some of the margin Chinese competitors have eroded. Japanese and Korean automakers, watching their decades-long grip on Southeast Asia loosen in real time, have started fast-tracking their own electric lineups rather than waiting for the market to come back to them, essentially conceding that the old timeline, years of careful incremental rollout, no longer exists as an option. None of it has reversed the trend yet. It has only proven how seriously the rest of the industry now takes a company it was mocking less than a decade ago. ago. So how did one company from Shenzhen become one of the greatest threats the global auto industry has faced in 100 years? Not with a single brilliant car, with batteries stockpiled while others weren't looking, with chips made in-house while a shortage crippled everyone else, with ships built while freight costs punished the rest of the field, with factories placed exactly where tariffs couldn't reach them, the government behind all of it that had already decided decades ago that owning the future of transportation was worth almost any price. Every one of those moves alone looks like good business. Stacked together over 30 years, they look like something else. A supply chain built to survive any single point of failure. A pricing strategy built to make competition nearly impossible. A logistics network immune to the market forces that constrain everyone else. And a government patient enough to fund the losses for 2 decades, waiting for exactly this moment. This never really was about who builds the best electric car. It was about who controls the century after oil, minerals, the batteries, the ships, the factories, and the roads they all lead to. Somewhere in a Shenzhen workshop in 1995, an orphaned chemist with a borrowed loan and 20 employees started building a battery company. He ended up building one of the most quietly effective instruments of national power the modern world has seen. And the world is only now starting to realize it was never about the cars at all.